Great. Hi, everybody. I'll try that again. Hi, everybody. Thank you. So good to be here today. So I'm going to talk to you about the basics of security culture. I've always been interested in culture, whether it was culture in societies or culture in organisations, and I guess it's no wonder that I started my career as a psychologist before making a move into security. Because every business has a unique organisational culture that affects how it operates. And it's the same way a family has a culture that affects how it operates as well. Consider this one. Many of the issues in this family is because of the clash of cultures between the traditional royal family and how it's supposed to behave and supposed to operate, and the cultural differences that emerged when Meghan and Harry married and started changing the way those things were done. It's nice to know that every family has issues as well. I think that's kind of a reassuring. Culture is how things are done around here, and it shapes how people think, make decisions, and certainly how they act and behave as well. So as Jed mentioned, in London I became interested in security culture, and I managed to get a job with MI5, working in their behavioural sciences unit. So that was located within CP&I, the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure, and it was their forward-facing unit. So we were working out in the community with critical infrastructure organisations. So security culture is about how an organisation or an individual behaves in terms of its style and approach to security. And the security culture of MI5, as you can imagine, was extremely strong. For example, from day one, we were taught to be paranoid about just the act of going to work. So at the door of our offices, we would blank people until we were safely inside the doors and out of sight. So blanking means you would pretend not to know them, you wouldn't acknowledge them, you wouldn't even say hello. And it made sense because there was a chance that someone could be watching you and it could endanger your own safety or the safety of others. Inside the office, your office peers would help manage your security behaviours in a really proactive way. For example, if you left your computer unlocked when you walked away from it, God forbid, or any papers were left on your desk after you went home, or you didn't collect your printing straight away, then your colleague, and this is any colleague at any seniority level, would give you some coaching, a teaching moment. And if you did it again, it would get more serious. And if you're a repeat offender, then you would be pretty much released to elsewhere, so asked not to come back to work. It was a pretty extreme example of a security culture, but it was right for the context of the organisation. So culture pervades every part of an organisation and affects how it operates, and this includes its security. But you know what? Security, while we love it and find it super exciting, it's often not so interesting. You know, they don't call it 50 Shades of Security. It's sometimes less sexy, a little bit boring, and also you're often putting blockers in front of people who are just trying to get on and do their job. So, how do we make security interesting then? And because it is difficult, because if we do lock security down too hard, people feel like they can't move. But how tightly you do lock down security is going to be a factor of the context of the business operates in, and it should be appropriate to that. So what are the kind of human factor mistakes that can lead to hackers logging in rather than hacking their way in? So I've got some examples here, and I'm going to use first person just to illustrate how human they are. I used a weak password on my account, which was easy to figure out or guess. I entered my credentials into that website because it looked a little bit like my company portal, and because I received an email for what I thought was from my IT department asking me to log in. I misconfigured my cloud. Just leave it there. I took the person on the phone at their word because they sounded trustworthy, but I should have checked out a couple more of those details or realised that the prize I thought I had won was too good to be true. I didn't patch those systems or that vulnerability because I've been really busy with project work. I gave my password to my EA because it was convenient for her to just log in as me and process those staff expenses. I don't update the software on my phone or my home computer regularly because I figure it's just new features and I hadn't appreciated the critical security fixes that had come through. I approved that MFA, though I didn't initiate it right then, because I approve these all the time and I just assumed it was a delayed one that had come through. I transferred money because it looked like an urgent email from my CEO, And I took my laptop to the pub, stuck it under the table because I needed to take it home, and then it was stolen, and so on and so on. So failure to improve security culture and really give it the attention that it deserves can lead to loss of intellectual property, compromised systems, damage to brand and reputation of the CEO and the board, that's a biggie, major incidents that can threaten the survival of your organisation, and minor incidents that can be expensive and time-consuming to resolve. Here we go. I borrowed this slide from one of my Aura colleagues because I think it paints the picture really well, but human factors has been involved in 90% of data breaches in 2019, 88 to 91% of breaches of public cloud infrastructure, 99% of compromise attempts in 2019, and 70 to 90% of malicious breaches reported since 2005. So the human factor, security culture, and security behaviours can have massive impacts. But to change a person or an organisation's security culture and behaviours, you have to understand it's more than just about awareness. So for example, I think it's fair to say that everyone is 100% aware that smoking kills you, but people still smoke. And that's because they're not motivated enough or don't have the capability right now to quit. Security culture and getting people to do the right thing is sort of the same. Take the use of password managers, for example. So who here has a password manager? A few people. Who here knows people that don't have password managers? And keep your hands up if you know lots of people that don't have password managers. Yeah. So if you don't have a password manager, as you know, you're probably doing one or two things. You're writing all your passwords down on a piece of paper, on your phone, or on your computer, or you're using about 2 to 4 passwords across different accounts, and maybe you've got your secure password you're using across your bank accounts, and then your slightly less secure ones on your social media, and maybe a different one on the shopping platforms as well. So it would be great if, as the security team or as a CISO, you could just, pass the messages down to line managers and get them to tell their direct reports and then just follow up and check everything's been done. But we know that it doesn't quite work that way. It's more complicated than that. So instead, what we need to do is really inspire, motivate, encourage, and influence the business towards developing their security mindset, vigilant security attitudes, even to be comfortable challenging people that are perhaps more senior than them, and to do the right security thing even when no one's watching. The aim is to have security done as a matter of course, for our people to want to provide feedback to help us continually improve our security. But it sort of requires everyone in the company to be on the security team, and for managers and people to self-manage their own behaviours as well as that of other people, like at MI5. So we need to change the way we're thinking about security awareness. So my goal, my aspiration is to get people to really start loving security. And this is adults, but also children as well. I think we need to start early with them. So where do you start? Assess your security culture. So when you look at your security of your business, often you think of security assessments and pen tests come to mind, network boundary reviews, risk assessments, that sort of thing. But it's less common that people actually look at their security culture and the people risk and actually sort of study and measure that as well. But in order to have an effective strategy, it's really essential that you first measure the current state of your security culture because it's going to form part of your strategy. Also helps you diagnose any of the security issues that you might have in your company and then put plans against them as well. But it's interesting, when you're measuring security culture, it also actually affects other things as well. For example, it impacts on your business strategy development and implementation, it also helps with culture change, with identifying organisational subcultures that you might have, and you can use it as a security health check as well. And it also complements all those other surveys that go on in your organisation as well around engagement, satisfaction, health and safety. So how do you measure security culture? Well, there's a number of different ways. You can use checklists, you can use surveys, focus groups, observations. If we start with checklists, this is questions that tend to have a yes or no answer. So for example, does the board discuss security at each meeting? Yes or no. Do you have a security culture strategy? Yes or no. Have employees been briefed in the last 3 months on the security threats to the business? Yes or no. A step up from a checklist is to do a survey, and here you're looking for a lot more detail than simply yes or no. So a survey measures employees' perceptions of how well security is working and highlights the improvements in security culture where they're required. It also assesses employees' understanding of things like relevant threats, their security responsibilities, and then you can also touch into their motivations as well. It also helps you understand how frequently employees are performing specific security behaviours and what might encourage them to do more. So where do you find these security surveys? So a couple of places up here. So WINS, the World Institute for Nuclear Security, they're obviously very big on security, being in that nuclear space. They're really mature in that area. You can join their membership, which is free, and then you have access to all their resources. And they have a number of checklists and surveys in there, which you're free to use. CP&I also have their secure survey. So they're up to number 4 of this. This is a survey that I worked on when I was working there. It's a really good survey, but as far as I can tell, it's not currently available outside the UK. But wondering if maybe some of our government contacts in the audience can help kind of get some of that goodness coming to New Zealand. That would be really good. Of course, you can ask for expert advice from security companies out there, and that can be good because they'll probably base the survey around some kind of security model to make sure you're tapping into the different facets. But at the end of the day, you could probably also just look to what health and safety are doing, because they tend to be further along the road with this sort of thing. Look at their sort of questions and then flavour them security, and then it's probably going to give you a good baseline for how your security is performing as well. To build a human firewall, we need to learn what it's like to be human. So this is the reason I fell in love with security, and this is starting to get into the whole, what do you do about your security culture if you know that there's aspects you want to improve? So this brings us to talk about things like culture change. You know, how can you inspire, motivate and influence people to change their behaviours? A colleague of mine in London, Bruce Hallis, he said it really well when he said, first you have to learn to be human. Which sounds bizarre because we are humans, we should know how we behave. But of course, there's whole bodies of information around this. So psychology, which I've studied, but also neuroscience and behavioural economics get to play in the security field in this way. And they try to find answers to questions like, how do humans decide things? What motivates people to take action and others to not? And how can we influence those things? Well, to do so, you need to understand humans. So clearly those are big areas of work. However, here are my kind of 3 top books, if you like, in terms of giving you some inspiration for understanding human behaviour and then applying it to security. So the first is about the nudge concept. It was popularised in 2008. It was nudge, improving decisions about health, wealth and happiness. So nothing to do with security here, but still some real goodness in there. And nudge is a concept in behavioural economics. So it proposes that positive reinforcement and indirect suggestions as a way to influence behaviour and decision making. And nudging contrasts with other ways to achieve compliance, such as education, legislation and enforcement, which we're probably more familiar with. So for example, if you wanted people to eat healthier food, you'd put that food at eye level. This is, you know, what some supermarkets do. Whereas banning junk food is not a nudge, if that makes sense. And another analogy would be service stations. As we're going to the counter to pay for our petrol, they want us to upsell us to different things, and they put all these chocolate bars around us. And then for some reason, we end up picking one up on the way past as we pay for our petrol. So they're nudging us for that upsell. From a security perspective, in terms of nudges, I was recently updating our Cordia intranet, and on the main page I have a number of kind of tiles and buttons, but a couple that I had there was report a security concern, and then right beside it suggest a security improvement. Now, both buttons actually went off to the same form because they're very similar in terms of the information you're trying to gain. But the point was I wanted people to think about not just raising security concerns, but also thinking about improvements and letting us know them as well. The second book is Heard. So Heard, How to Change Mass Behaviour by Harnessing Our True Nature by Earls. And this book says that marketing to the individual isn't a good thing to do, but you should in fact market to the herd because we are all herd animals. So I have a video of Earls talking about this to explain the concept, and then I'll come back to Working Out Loud by John Stepper after the video as well. But first of all, a quick quiz. Who's heard of these books? No. Has anyone tried to use some of the concepts in their things? It can be quite difficult, yeah. Okay, so next is a video. I'm going to click and hopefully that should start for us.
Earls is one of the leading figures in strategic planning from the communications industry. He is an award-winning author of several books, including Heard, How to Change Mass Behaviour by Harnessing Our True Nature. He is a professional student of human behaviour with a unique ability to apply his learning to the world of strategy and business. Be prepared to change your view on the world.
Hello there. I'd like to talk to you today about people and their behaviour. Not in an HR war for talent kind of way, but as people and their behaviour as the subject and the prime focus for strategy and strategising. You see, I think behaviour needs to become the prime concern of all managers in business and anyone doing any kind of strategy, because the ability to shape other people's behaviour is the prime value creation lever for business today. First, rather than slogging away trying to change people's minds in order to change their behaviour, it seems more useful to get people to do something first and let their minds follow along afterwards. In marketing terms, rather than persuading people or trying to persuade people to maybe one day try your product, give it to them. Get them to try it. And get lots of people to try it. And by the way, this does put a big focus again on making good products. If you want to start a revolution, start one. Don't sit around theorising about the best structure for the revolutionary committee and the best routes to the palace. Take it. Whatever you do, make sure you set your strategy in behavioural terms, in measurable behavioural terms, rather than opinions and attitudes and awareness and all that stuff of what goes on up here. And please don't waste too much of your time and money on asking people what they do and why they do it, because they just don't know. Thinking is very far from being the big thing, the big precursor. In fact, thinking and doing have exactly the opposite relationship to each other. Let me explain. First, the kind of deliberative thinking that we normally describe our accounts of our own lives with thinking before doing is really much less common than we imagine. Think of it this way, human beings are to thinking as cats are to swimming. We can do it if we really want, but only if we really want. Most of our lives are spent doing things and making sense of them afterwards. Our minds are lazy. We use shorthands, we know from neuroscience now. Shorthands, rules of thumb. And this is why, by the way, we're so open to errors. Things like what's called substitution bias. We see what we expect to see and not what's actually there. By seeing what we expect to see, we miss out on what's really going on in the world. We do like the idea that some people are more important than others. In marketing, we call it segmentation. In old school management, we call it sheep and goats, and in the Marines, it's up and out. Prioritisation looks really good, doesn't it? It looks efficient and professional. It gives you the sense of chunking things out. It gives you the air of someone with a very steely edge, very plausible, very rational, very efficient. Surely, you say, some people must have more influence over the rest of us than others, don't they? We all know people like that. And if we were just to focus our efforts on these influentials, then clearly our strategies for change would be very different in their success. Now, unfortunately, There's one thing that's been lost in all these fine words, in all these great case studies, and that's the truth. Because behaviour doesn't spread through populations like diseases. Most of the behaviour that we're interested in, addictions aside, spread through populations without any real stickiness at all. I mean, I struggle to understand how using a particular soap bar like Dove or a Cif cleaner is actually sticky or interesting in that sense. Indeed, most things that spread, most fads and fashions, are just one of many similar things that could have spread but didn't. It's rarely the thing, the behaviour, that's the important bit. And nor, and here's the big point, nor do things seem to spread through influence of a very small number of people, the few, the influentials who tell us, the rest of us, what to do. Rather, they spread from exactly the opposite end. From normal people copying what normal people do. Copying shapes so much of human behaviour that it's hard to believe that we have ignored it in business till now. Well, actually, one big corporation that everybody will know of uses copying at the heart of their business model. Amazon are probably the biggest business yet to use this, and they've grasped the importance of this copying and operationalised it in their software. On every product page, such as this, my latest book, they have 16 features which either capture your information, what you do, what you have done, what you think, and flip it over to other people, or they give other people's information to you. 16 on every single product page. Indeed, if you take one thing away from this talk today, it should be this. I think the best way to improve our ability to strategize and to improve the results of our strategizing, to create some impact on people's behavior, is to redraw our map of people and how they behave and how we get to shape it. To get this map of people to reflect what the broader world of modern behavioral science now knows about human beings and what it is to be human beings. To get a bit closer to the reality of real people and their real lives.
So one of the things that Mark talked about there was copying. So that's a big one. He's gone on to write a whole nother book about that called Copy, Copy, Copy. And he talked about that being how culture is actually passed around. And if we think about that in relation to our password manager example, if we just tell people to use a password manager, we may not get the uptake that we like. However, if we ran a workshop or if we said, tell you what, we'll download one right now. Go to your app store, find this, and they start the process of actually doing, then that is more how behaviour gets picked up, because you're showing them, not just telling them about what to do. So the last concept I want to talk to you about is, it's kind of been some of my personal secret sauce. It's something I've really enjoyed in the last few years as well. It's called working out loud. And sometimes I wonder if it's not a little bit more like dreaming out loud, because I never know where this will take me. When I started doing this sort of maybe 2.5 years ago, I came across it because I was working in digital transformation, and the way that in that organisation we communicated with our staff was we wrote really, really long verbose blogs and put them on the internet. Now, video was starting to come out a little bit more and becoming more accessible for just lay people to put together. So I knew that if I was going to be a real digital leader, I had to learn some digital behaviours and I had to start working with the video medium. So I gave it a go. It certainly wasn't natural when I started doing it. I'd started doing it internally and kind of got some comfort and sort of saw that it was working internally to communicate with my staff. Because as a digital leader, I was really making myself accountable for the performance of IT and the projects that we were running. And that seemed to kind of really work. Then I got a little bit more confident, and then I started to do it outside of work and on the internet. And that's where the whole digital ideas piece came from. So let me come back to working out loud. So it's a way to build relationships that help you achieve a goal, develop a skill, or explore a new topic. So instead of sort of networking to get something, you invest in relationships by making contributions. And you do that over time, and that might be your work or your experiences, and you're making all of this visible. When you work out loud, your contributions build trust, and they deepen a sense of relatedness, increasing the chance of cooperation and collaboration later on. So you become more effective because you have access to more people, more knowledge, and more opportunities. And you feel better too because you have this bigger network of meaningful people, a greater sense of control, competence and connection. So it's really good for individuals because it's quite motivating for them, but then it's also really good for organisations as well because it creates agility, innovation and collaboration for an organisation. Although I think organisations do struggle with this a little bit when their staff and employees sort of start to become these brand individuals, but then there's also a company kind of brand as well. So it's a learning journey for everyone. So it's not necessarily about putting your ideas out there the whole time, because if you had to create like that, that would be super exhausting. I certainly, can't come up with that many new ideas every day. But what it's more about is documenting your experiences as well. So rather than creating and sharing the learnings that come with that. So there's 5 elements that make it up. The first is around relationships being at the heart of it. So your pathway to knowledge is through others. And we're actually seeing this happen a lot. A lot of courses or training it's starting to move away from the formal institutions of learning that we're used to and starting to move to more towards people and experts in their field, which is kind of interesting. But by making your work really visible, you amplify who you are and what you do, and obviously extend your reach. And another element is that generosity. So we're really wired for that reciprocal altruism. So that if you do something for me, I'm more likely to do something for you. And that's kind of the whole paying it forward part of it as well. Purposeful discovery is a really important part of it, and I really liked this because, particularly when I was doing digital transformation, I was new to it. So I didn't know everything I needed to know about it, but it was about discovering information and learning about it. And then lastly is the growth mindset, and I also really liked this part of it as well, because you don't have to be the expert yourself. You can, for example, interview other people who are really great in the field and be on the learning journey with them. So I just started, and I've purposely put up here some of my oldest and most terrible looking videos because you can't let perfection stop you. If you spend too much time in post-production, you'll never put content out to your organisation around security messages, or if it's for social media, for example, as well. So yep, I've got my weird face going on in that middle one there. The bottom one, I'm in my kitchen wearing my cardi. But yes, you've got to start. So I recorded these short videos and started posting them up on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and then I also started a podcast around lockdown as well. Digital Culture is a show about how technology and the internet is significantly changing the way we interact, behave, think and communicate. And it's me on this learning journey around digital culture and what that means. And a part of digital culture is security, because all of life is going digital in some way. Every career, every industry, every job, it's all going to be digital. So security is a key part of that. To finish up, I wanted to bring this to the table. It's a model that I have in my head all the time when I'm thinking about security culture. Might have been actually useful to have this first, but anyway, hopefully this brings it together at the end. So it's a model that I put together and adapted from a couple of other security culture models that I was working with. So the whole premise here is that culture, so the organisation's values and beliefs, that gets embedded in your employees' attitudes and opinions, and then that influences their behaviour. So that's kind of the causal chain, if you like. And when you're wanting to shape security culture, to me there are these 6 mechanisms that you have at your disposal. And you'll see it's more than just that one at number 5, communication and awareness. You need to get buy-in and commitment from management. So we probably all have a number of ways that we are already doing this in our organisation. It's always good to swap ideas on that one as well, because it is the most key one. Next, you need to find ways to incentivise and motivate staff as well. So this is carrot and stick, but then also empowerment as well as a motivating factor. Third, you need to consider how the business manages pressures like stress, fatigue, delivery pressures, because you want to make sure people don't cut corners. So what are the mitigations or controls you can put in place here to, for example, make it okay for someone to call stop if something isn't being done securely and safely? Number 4 is about having security embedded into your organisational systems, because security doesn't exist on its own. There will be a health and safety system, a risk management system, a quality system, also HR systems as well, like induction and performance management. And lastly, number 5, you do need to have your comms. Internet pages are great. The collaboration tools we have are really good. The town halls, the bulletins, the emails, all of those different comms channels are really important, and you need to use them all, because you shouldn't discriminate how people get their information in your organisation. You should provide it in whatever form they're consuming it in. And then lastly, you need to consider how you're going to develop that compliance and that real ownership for security in people as well. So monitoring and things like that may come into play. But again, that reciprocity kind of principle can be used here as well. Right, so that's it. That's the basics of security culture according to Hilary Walton. It's obviously a subject that's really dear to my heart and one I love chatting about, so feel free to connect with me in any way that you prefer.